Have you ever discovered that the person destroying your child's future was living under your own roof the entire time? I never thought I would become the kind of mother who hides cameras in her own home to spy on her children, but here I am, sitting in my minivan at 2 in the morning watching grainy footage of my 11-year-old daughter systematically destroying her brother's dreams. My name is Madison Coleman. I am a single working mother of 2, and I have spent the last 2 years fighting a battle I did not even know I was losing. Let me back up because this story does not start with hidden cameras and betrayal, it starts with pride. It starts with my son Silas, who at 7 years old built his first science fair project about how plants grow toward light. He called it simple and obvious, but the way his eyes lit up when he explained phototropism to the judges made my heart swell. He won second place at his school fair, and I remember thinking that maybe, just maybe, something good was happening for us after everything we had been through. You see, Silas was born right around the time his father decided he did not want to be a father anymore. My ex-husband Marcus left when I was 8 months pregnant, moved 3 states away, and started what he called his real life. He sends Silas a card every birthday with $200 in it and sometimes a gift, some expensive toy or gadget that shows he knows nothing about his son except that he exists. He has never called, never visited, never asked about school or friends or what Silas likes for breakfast. But those cards come like clockwork every September 23rd, and every year Silas saves them in a box under his bed like they are treasure. Violet was 4 when Marcus left, and she remembers him, remembers the before times when we were a family. She remembers daddy-daughter breakfasts and piggyback rides and being his little princess. Then one day he was just gone, and she spent months asking when he was coming home. When her 5th birthday came and went without a card, without a call, without anything, something in her changed. She stopped asking about him and started working harder at everything, trying to be perfect, trying to be the best. So when Silas started showing an interest in science, I encouraged it. God knows we needed something positive in our lives. I was working 50-hour weeks as a medical billing coordinator just to keep us afloat, coming home exhausted every night to help with homework and make dinner and pretend that everything was fine. Silas's curiosity about how things work became this bright spot, this thing that was just his. The first science fair disqualification happened when Silas was 8. He had spent 3 weeks building a model to demonstrate how earthquakes affect different building structures. He had researched everything, taken notes in his careful handwriting, built 3 different buildings from scratch. The night before the school fair, he showed me his presentation and it was perfect. But the next day, when the judges evaluated his project, they disqualified him. They said his measurements were wrong, that the scale he had recorded did not match the actual model, that it showed a fundamental misunderstanding of the scientific method. Silas was devastated. He kept saying he knew his measurements were right, he had checked them 5 times. I marched into that school and demanded to speak with the science fair coordinator, a woman named Mrs. Patterson, who looked at me like I was one of those mothers, the kind who cannot accept that their child made a mistake. She showed me his project board, and sure enough, the numbers were wrong. They were not even close to correct. Silas swore up and down he had not made those errors, but what could I do? He was 8, he was upset, maybe he had made a mistake and forgotten. Violet had also entered the fair that year with a project about water filtration. She won 1st place at the school level and 2nd place at regionals. I was proud of her, of course, but I also saw how she looked at Silas that day, how something flickered in her eyes when he cried in the car on the way home. I told myself I was imagining things, that she was his big sister and she felt bad for him. I did not see what was right in front of my face. The next year, Silas entered again. This time he had built an elaborate project about chemical reactions, specifically how different substances react with baking soda. He had done everything right, followed every guideline, documented everything. I had helped him double-check his materials list against the competition rules. We were both so sure this was his year. And then, the morning of the fair, the judges disqualified him again. This time they said he had used unauthorized chemicals, that someone had found vinegar in his display when the rules clearly stated only approved substances. But Silas had not brought vinegar, he had used lemon juice, which was on the approved list. When we checked his project, there was a bottle of white vinegar sitting right there next to his display. I lost it. I went full mama bear on the school administration. I accused them of discriminating against my son, of having it out for him, of incompetence. I sent emails to the principal, to the district science coordinator, to anyone who would listen. I became that parent, the one teachers probably talked about in the break room. But my baby had worked so hard and someone had clearly tampered with his project and I was not going to let it slide. Violet won first place at regionals that year and qualified for the state competition. She was gracious about it, told Silas she was sorry about what happened to him, said it was not fair. She even offered to help him with his project the next year. I thought it was sweet, thought maybe the sibling rivalry I had worried about was not as bad as I feared. I was so stupid. This pattern continued. Every time Silas entered a science fair, something went wrong at the last minute. Data would be deleted from his computer, labels would be switched on his materials, measurements would be mysteriously incorrect. And every time, I fought with the school. I wrote letters, I demanded investigations, I became increasingly convinced that someone at that school had it out for my son. Meanwhile, Violet continued to excel, winning competition after competition, collecting trophies and certificates and praise. I started to notice other things too, small things that did not make sense. Like how Silas would set up his project in the dining room and the next morning something would be slightly off. He would mention it and I would tell him he was probably remembering wrong, that he was stressed. Or how Violet would volunteer to help him practice his presentation and afterward he would seem less confident somehow, second-guessing himself. But I was working long hours, I was tired, I was fighting my own battles with bill collectors and an ex-husband who could not be bothered to acknowledge his daughter existed. I did not see what was happening under my own roof. Then came the letter that changed everything. 3 months ago, Silas received notification that he had been accepted to the Anderson STEM Academy Summer Program, a prestigious 6-week camp for gifted science students. The scholarship was worth $8,500, and it was contingent on one thing: Silas had to place in the top 5 at the upcoming regional science fair. If he was disqualified again or did not place, he would lose the spot and they would give it to an alternate. This was huge. This was life-changing. The Anderson Academy had a track record of sending kids to top universities, of opening doors that stayed closed for families like ours. This was Silas's chance to have something his father's absence could never take away from him, something that was purely his own achievement. Silas threw himself into his project with an intensity one had never seen before. He chose to study the effects of different wavelengths of light on plant growth, building grow boxes with LED lights of different colors and carefully monitoring his plants over 8 weeks. He was meticulous, documenting everything in a lab notebook, taking photos, measuring growth down to the millimeter. He worked on it every day after school and on weekends, sometimes staying up past his bedtime to check on his plants. Violet seemed supportive, asking him questions about his hypothesis, helping him pick out poster board at the craft store, even giving him tips on his presentation based on what had worked for her in competitions. I was so relieved, so grateful that she was being such a good sister during this important time. I even told her how proud I was of her for being kind when she could have been jealous. The regional fair was scheduled for 3 weeks away. Silas had finished growing his plants and was in the final stages of compiling his data and creating his display board. His project was solid, his documentation was impeccable, his conclusions were scientifically sound. I had checked every single rule in the competition guidelines myself. There was no way anything could go wrong this time. That's when the doubt started creeping in. Silas began coming to me with concerns, saying he thought someone was going into his room at night. He said he would arrange his notes a certain way and the next morning they would be different. He said he could swear his photos were not in the same order he had left them. I told him he was being paranoid, that the stress of the competition was getting to him. I told him to make sure he locked his bedroom door at night if he was worried. But then things started happening that could not be explained away. His backup flash drive with all his photos and data went missing. He found it 3 days later in the kitchen junk drawer and had no memory of putting it there. One of his plant samples died suddenly even though he had been caring for it exactly the same as the others. The color printer ran out of ink the night before he planned to print his final charts and we had to scramble to find a store open late. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Was someone really sabotaging Silas's projects or was this just bad luck and my own paranoia? I had accused the school of conspiracy, had burned bridges with teachers and administrators because I was so convinced someone was targeting my son. What if I was wrong? What if I was the problem, projecting my anger about Marcus onto innocent people just trying to do their jobs? 2 weeks before the fair, I came home from work early because I had a splitting headache. I took some medicine and lay down on the couch, dozing in and out. Around 9 at night, I heard footsteps in the hallway, quiet and careful. I assumed it was Silas going to the bathroom, but something made me get up and peek around the corner. It was Violet, and she was carrying something small in her hand, walking towards Silas's room. His door was closed, and I could see the light off underneath, meaning he was already asleep. I watched as Violet slowly turned his doorknob, waited to see if he stirred, then slipped inside his room. She was in there for maybe 5 minutes before she came out, closed the door just as carefully, and went back to her own room. My heart was pounding. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe she had borrowed something and was returning it. Maybe she was being a good sister and checking on him. But something felt wrong, felt off. I waited until I heard her door close, then I went to Silas's room and opened it quietly. He was fast asleep, his science project materials spread out on his desk like always. Everything looked normal. I was about to leave when I noticed his lab notebook was open to a different page than I remembered seeing earlier. I went over and looked at it more carefully. There were erasure marks on several data entries, the numbers changed just slightly. Not enough that anyone would notice unless they knew exactly what had been there before, but enough to make his calculations come out wrong. I felt sick. I felt like the floor was dropping out from under me. I wanted to be wrong so badly, wanted there to be some other explanation, but I knew what I had seen. I knew what this meant. I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through the last 2 years, reframing every disqualification and every coincidence through this new horrible lens. Violet had been in the house every single time something had gone wrong with Silas's projects. Violet had been the one to volunteer to help him, to have access to his materials and his data. Violet had been the one standing beside me when I screamed at school administrators about discrimination and tampering, all while knowing she was the one who had done it. My own daughter had been sabotaging her brother, and I had been her perfect cover, her unwitting accomplice. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to an electronics store. I bought a small wireless camera, the kind you can monitor from your phone, and I installed it in Silas's room while both kids were at school. I hid it inside a bookshelf with a clear view of his desk and his project materials. I felt guilty, felt like I was betraying my children's privacy, but I needed to know for sure. I needed proof of what was happening. That night at dinner, I mentioned casually that I had to work late the next 2 evenings, that I would not be home until after 9. I watched Violet's face when I said it, and I saw something there, a flicker of calculation, of planning. She asked if I needed her to make dinner for her and Silas, and I said yes, told her she was such a responsible big sister, told her I did not know what I would do without her. I wanted to throw up. The next night, I did not actually work late. I parked my car around the corner and sat there with my phone, watching the camera feed from Silas's room. At 7:30, both kids were in the living room watching television. At 8:15, Silas went to his room to work on his project. I watched him carefully arrange his data sheets, check his plants one more time, practice his presentation to his stuffed elephant. At 9:20, he turned off his light and went to brush his teeth. At 9:45, Violet appeared on the camera feed. I watched her open Silas's door, watched her wait to make sure he was asleep. Then I watched her walk over to his desk and start going through his project materials. She was methodical, careful, like she had done this 100 times before. She took out her phone and used the light to read his data sheets, then pulled a pen from her pocket and started making small changes to his numbers. She switched 2 of his photo labels, swapping the plant that had grown under red light with the one under blue light. She took his bottle of distilled water and replaced it with tap water, which would ruin his control group if he used it for final measurements. I sat in my car watching my daughter systematically destroy her brother's dreams, and I started crying. Not quiet tears, but big ugly sobs that made my whole body shake. This was my baby, my firstborn, the little girl who used to bring me flowers from the yard and write me notes that said "I love you, Mommy" in crayon. This was the child I had protected and provided for and sacrificed everything for, and she was doing something so cruel, so calculated, that I could barely comprehend it. But I kept watching because I needed to see all of it, needed to understand the full scope of what she had been doing. The video showed her spending almost 10 minutes in Silas's room, touching his project, altering his work, ensuring that once again he would fail and be humiliated. When she finally left, I sat in my car for another 20 minutes trying to compose myself. I wanted to storm into the house and confront her immediately, wanted to scream and demand answers, but I knew I could not. I needed to be smart about this, needed to handle it the right way. This was not just about the science fair anymore, this was about my family, about 2 years of damage that I had to somehow repair. The next day, I made an appointment with the school counselor, a woman named Mrs. Chen who I had yelled at 6 months earlier about the unfair treatment Silas was receiving. I went to her office and I apologized, told her I had been wrong, told her I had discovered something disturbing at home. I showed her the camera footage from the night before and I watched her face go through shock, disbelief, and finally understanding. She was kind about it, told me this was more common than I thought, that sibling rivalry could manifest in destructive ways, especially in households where there was parental absence or favoritism. She said the word favoritism carefully, gently, and I knew what she meant. Marcus's treatment of Silas versus Violet was a gaping wound in our family that I had tried to bandage with positivity and hard work. But wounds do not heal when you just cover them up and pretend they are not there. Mrs. Chen advised me to confront Violet directly, to use the footage as evidence, but also to approach it from a place of trying to understand why she had been doing this. She reminded me that Violet was still a child, that children act out in pain, that this was a cry for help even if it was coming out in the most destructive way possible. I scheduled a family therapy session for the following week, but I knew I could not wait that long to address this. The science fair was in 2 days and Silas's project was already compromised by Violet's tampering. If I did not act now, he would lose his chance at the Anderson Academy, would lose this opportunity that might never come again. That evening, I told Silas I needed to check his project one more time, to make absolutely sure everything was perfect. We went through it together and I subtly pointed out the changes Violet had made, framing them as things he must have accidentally mixed up. We fixed the photo labels, I had him remake his measurements using fresh distilled water, we corrected the altered numbers in his lab notebook. He was confused about how these mistakes had happened, but I told him it was the stress, that he had been working so hard his brain was just tired. After Silas went to bed, I asked Violet to come sit with me in the kitchen. She came bouncing in, asking if we could watch a movie together, if I wanted to hear about her day. My heart broke all over again looking at her, at this child who had been harboring so much anger and pain that she had turned it into a weapon against her own brother. I pulled out my phone and I showed her the video. At first she tried to deny it, said it was not what it looked like, said she was just checking on his project to make sure it was okay. But as the video played, as she watched herself methodically sabotaging Silas's work, her face crumpled. She started crying, these horrible broken sobs, and she kept saying she was sorry over and over again. I wanted to comfort her, but I also needed her to understand the gravity of what she had done. I asked her why, asked her to help me understand how she could do this to her brother. At first she would not answer, just kept crying and apologizing. But finally, after I promised I was not going to stop loving her but I needed the truth, it all came pouring out. She told me about how Dad left right after Silas was born, how in a child's mind she had connected those two things, had believed that somehow Silas had driven him away. She told me about waiting every year for a birthday card that never came, watching Silas get money and gifts from a father who did not even acknowledge she existed. She said she knew it was not Silas's fault, but she could not help feeling angry every time the card arrived, every time Silas talked about saving the money Dad sent, every time he carefully added a new gift to his collection. She said that when Silas started winning at science fairs, getting attention and praise and opportunities, something inside her snapped. She had been working so hard to be perfect, to be worthy of being noticed, and Silas just naturally excelled at things without even trying that hard. She said she had not planned to sabotage his first project, that she had just been looking at it one night and noticed she could change a number and no one would know. When he got disqualified and she won, she felt powerful for the first time since Dad left. She felt like maybe she could control something, could make things fair in the only way she knew how. She said it became addictive, this secret power she had. Every time she sabotaged Silas's project, every time he failed and she succeeded, it felt like proof that she was worth something, that she was the better child, that Dad had been wrong to forget about her. She said she knew it was wrong, said she felt terrible every time she watched Silas cry, but she could not stop. She said when she heard about the Anderson Academy opportunity, she panicked because if Silas went to that camp, if he succeeded that big, she would lose the one thing she had that made her feel valuable. I listened to my daughter pour out 2 years of pain and jealousy and desperation, and I realized how completely I had failed both of my children. I had been so focused on surviving, on working and paying bills and keeping us afloat, that I had not seen what was happening right in front of me. I had not addressed the elephant in the room, the father who had chosen to be present for one child and absent for the other. I had not gotten them help when Marcus left, had just assumed they would be fine because they had me and we had each other. I had been wrong about so much. We stayed up until almost 2 in the morning talking. I told Violet that her father's choices were not a reflection of her worth, that he was broken in ways that had nothing to do with her. I told her that Silas getting attention did not diminish her, that there was not a finite amount of love or pride or validation in the world. I told her that what she had done was serious and wrong and there would be consequences, but that I loved her and we would get through this together. I also told her that she was going to help fix this, that she was going to help Silas finish his project correctly, that she was going to make sure he had every chance to succeed at the regional fair. She nodded, still crying, and said she would do anything to make it right. The next day after school, I sat both kids down and I told Silas the truth. I showed him the video and I watched his face go through confusion, hurt, betrayal, and finally anger. He looked at Violet and asked why, asked how she could do that to him. She tried to explain, but the words came out broken and inadequate because how do you explain something like that to a 9-year-old who has never felt anything but love for his sister? Silas did not yell or cry, he just got very quiet. He said he had known something was wrong, that he had felt like he was going crazy. He said he had started to think maybe he was not good at science after all, that maybe everyone had been lying to him when they said he had potential. Hearing him say that, hearing how Violet's sabotage had damaged his confidence and self-worth, made me want to scream. But instead, I told both of them that we were going to fix this. I told Silas that his projects had been good, that he had been right all along, that someone had been tampering with his work but now we knew who and why and it was going to stop. I told Violet that she was going to help Silas rebuild his current project from scratch, that she was going to use all her science fair expertise to make sure it was perfect. I told them both that we were going to start family therapy and that we were going to address the issue of their father head-on, no more pretending it did not hurt. The next 2 days were intense. Violet and Silas worked together on his project and at first it was awkward and painful, but slowly something started to shift. Violet genuinely helped him, showed him techniques she had learned, helped him create a better presentation than he had before. Silas started to see that his sister really was sorry, that she was trying to make amends. They were not suddenly best friends, but there was a tenuous bridge being built between them. I also did something I should have done years ago. I wrote a letter to Marcus and I told him exactly what his selective parenting had done to our children. I told him about Violet's sabotage and Silas's confusion and the therapy bills I was now going to have to somehow afford. I told him he was a coward and a failure as a father and that his yearly cards to Silas were not a kindness, they were a cruelty. I told him to either be a father to both children or leave them both alone. I mailed that letter and I did not expect a response because Marcus had shown me over and over who he was, but writing it felt like lancing a wound, letting out poison that had been festering for years. The day of the regional science fair arrived. Silas's project was perfect, truly perfect this time. His data was accurate, his display was professional, his presentation was confident and clear. Violet went with us to the fair and before judging started, I pulled her aside and told her what she needed to do. She walked over to Silas, took a deep breath, and in front of me and dozens of other students and parents, she apologized. She told him she had been sabotaging his projects for 2 years, that she had been the reason he kept getting disqualified. She said she had been wrong and cruel and she was deeply sorry. She said he was an amazing scientist and she was proud to be his sister. You could have heard a pin drop. Other parents stared, a few students whispered, but Silas just looked at his sister and said thank you. He did not say he forgave her. We had talked about how forgiveness was a process, not a single moment, but he acknowledged her apology and that was enough for now. The judging took 3 hours. Silas presented his project to 5 different judges and I watched from a distance as he answered their questions with enthusiasm and knowledge. He was not nervous, not second-guessing himself, he was just purely in his element. This was the child I had known was in there all along, the curious bright boy who had been buried under years of manufactured failure. When they announced the winners, Silas placed first in his age category. He won first place at regionals and qualified for the state fair and secured his spot at the Anderson Academy. He looked at me from across the room and his smile was so big, so genuine, that I started crying right there in front of everyone. Violet clapped for him, really clapped, not the polite automatic applause of sibling obligation but real celebration. When Silas came over with his trophy, she hugged him and told him he deserved it. It was not perfect, there was still awkwardness and hurt between them, but it was real and honest, and that was more than we had before. The consequences for Violet were serious and ongoing. She lost her computer privileges for 3 months and her phone for 2 months. She had to write apology letters to every teacher and administrator I had yelled at on her behalf, explaining what she had done and taking responsibility. She started therapy twice a week to address her feelings about her father and her jealousy towards Silas. I also made her volunteer at a local youth center teaching science to younger kids, helping them with their projects, because I wanted her to remember what it felt like to build someone up instead of tearing them down. But more than the punishments, Violet had to live with what she had done, had to rebuild trust with her brother slowly and painfully. Silas was not mean to her, but he was cautious, and rightfully so. They were in family therapy together and individually, working through the damage that had been done. As for me, I had to face my own failures as a parent. I had to acknowledge that my anger at Marcus had made me see enemies where there were none, had made me fight the wrong battles while the real crisis was happening in my own home. I had to accept that working long hours and providing financially was not enough, that my children needed me to see them, really see them, even when that seeing was painful and complicated. 2 weeks after the regional fair, I got a letter from Marcus. It was short and defensive, saying I was being dramatic, saying he sent money to Silas because Silas was planned and wanted while Violet had been an accident. That word, accident, applied to my daughter like she was a mistake that should be grateful she was tolerated at all. I did not show the letter to Violet, but I did share it with our therapist. She said it confirmed what we already knew, that Marcus was emotionally stunted and incapable of the kind of introspection required for change. She said the best thing I could do for both children was to stop waiting for him to be different and start building a life where his absence was not a wound we kept reopening. So that is what we are doing. Silas's birthday came last month, and when the card arrived with the usual $200, we had a family meeting about it. Silas said he did not want the money anymore if it meant Violet was left out, that it felt wrong to accept something that hurt his sister. We ended up donating the money to the youth center where Violet volunteers, and we sent the card back to Marcus unopened. We included a note that said if he wanted to be part of his children's lives, plural children, he needed to actually be present, not just a twice-a-year reminder of rejection. He has not responded, and I do not expect he will. But my children know that I see them both, that I value them both, that they do not have to compete for scraps of validation from a man who was never capable of giving them what they needed. Silas leaves for the Anderson Academy next week. He is nervous but excited, ready to spend 6 weeks with kids who love science as much as he does. Violet helped him pack, helped him plan what projects he might want to work on while he is there. They are not where they used to be, that innocent sibling closeness is probably gone forever, but they are building something new, something more honest. The school administration was surprisingly understanding when I explained everything. Mrs. Patterson, the science fair coordinator I had screamed at multiple times, actually apologized to me. She said she had suspected sibling sabotage during one of the disqualifications but had not felt she could say anything without proof. She said she was glad we had gotten help and she hoped both children would continue to thrive. I apologized to her and to every other teacher I had wrongly accused. It was humbling and embarrassing but necessary, owning my part in how things had unfolded. Looking back, I can see all the signs I missed, all the moments I could have intervened if I had been paying closer attention. But I also know that beating myself up over what I did not see will not help my children heal. All I can do is be better going forward, be more present, be willing to look at the hard truths instead of wrapping them in excuses. Violet is doing better, truly better. She still struggles with feelings of inadequacy and jealousy, but she is learning healthier ways to process those emotions. She talks to her therapist, she talks to me, she even talks to Silas sometimes. Last week she entered a local science fair and won second place, and she was genuinely happy with her result, not devastated that she had not won first. That felt like progress. The other day, Silas asked Violet to help him practice his presentation for a scholarship interview, and she said yes without hesitation. They spent an hour in the living room, Violet giving him feedback and encouragement, both of them laughing at one point when he accidentally knocked over his note cards. I watched him from the kitchen and felt something I had not felt in years, hope that we might actually be okay. We are not a perfect family, we probably never will be. We carry scars from Marcus's abandonment and Violet's betrayal and my own blindness to what was happening. But we are honest now in a way we were not before. We talk about the hard things, we do not pretend that pain does not exist, we work through it together instead of suffering alone. Silas still keeps his project materials in his room, but he does not lock the door anymore. Violet still achieves and excels, but she is learning that her worth is not contingent on being better than everyone else. And I still work long hours to keep us afloat, but I make time for family dinners and therapy appointments and conversations that go deeper than how was your day. The $8,500 scholarship that came with the Anderson Academy acceptance was a lifeline for us financially, but the real gift was the catalyst it provided for change. If Violet had not escalated her sabotage because the stakes were so high, if I had not installed that camera out of desperation, we might have continued this toxic pattern for years. Sometimes crisis is necessary for transformation, painful as it is. I think about the night I sat in my minivan watching that grainy footage of my daughter destroying her brother's project, and I remember feeling like my family was irreparably broken. But families are not static things, they are not broken or whole in permanent ways. They are constantly being broken and repaired and reshaped by the choices we make every single day. My choice now is to see both my children clearly, to love them through their failures and their triumphs, to build a home where they do not have to compete for my attention or validation or pride. My choice is to stop letting Marcus's absence define us and start letting our presence for each other be enough. It is not easy, and there are still hard days when Violet struggles with resentment or Silas pulls away because trust is fragile. But we keep showing up, keep doing the work, keep believing that honesty and effort can heal what secrets and pain have damaged. Silas won first place at the state science fair last month and qualified for nationals. Violet was there cheering him on, genuinely proud of her brother's achievement. When a local reporter asked Violet how she felt about her brother's success, she said she was inspired by him, that he had taught her that real achievement is not about beating other people. It is about challenging yourself to be better than you were yesterday. I do not know if she fully believes that yet, but she is learning. We all are. The science fair sabotage could have destroyed us, probably should have destroyed us. But instead it became the thing that forced us to face the truth, to acknowledge the wounds we had been ignoring, to start the hard work of healing. We are not perfect, but we are honest, and for now, that is enough.